The path is 34 centimeters wide. That is a specific number, not an approximation, not an aesthetic choice arrived at by eye, but a measured width maintained within a few centimeters across the full 261.5-meter circuit of the Chartres Cathedral labyrinth. At 34 centimeters, the path is too narrow to walk casually. It requires attention. Your feet must be placed deliberately, heel to toe or nearly so, the body's center of mass tracked and adjusted with each step. The path changes direction 112 times before it reaches the center. Those turns are not random. They occur at consistent intervals, alternating left and right in a pattern that has been stable in this stone floor since approximately 1205. You can walk it today. You can measure it yourself. Why do the surviving geometric records of French Gothic cathedral labyrinths, path width, wire circuit count, turning frequency, total path length, match the parameters used in modern clinical protocols for parasympathetic nervous system activation through directed walking, while every surviving medieval document describing why labyrinths were built refers only to symbolic pilgrimage substitution? And why were 17 of the 22 documented French Gothic cathedral labyrinths physically removed between 1690 and 1880, with the precise date of each removal recorded in cathedral chapter archives? While no document from any of those archives explains why these specific floor features, and not the tile work or heraldic inlays surrounding them, required destruction. Two bodies of evidence point at the same anomaly. The geometry of these structures is the geometry of a clinical instrument. The record of their targeted removal is complete. The rationale that connects those two facts has never been written down. That is the conflict. That is what this video addresses. If you enjoy these stories, then support the channel by liking and subscribing. Thank you. Jean d'Orbais was the first master mason of Reims Cathedral, appointed around 1211. He designed the structure's foundational geometry. His name, his role, and the years he served were carved in stone inside the Reims Cathedral labyrinth. One of 4 master masons depicted within the circuit in the 4 corners of the labyrinth's octagonal design. That image of Jean d'Orbais was destroyed in 1779 when Canon Jacquemart ordered the Reims labyrinth taken up. The stone was broken. The fragments were removed. The only record of what d'Orbais looked like, the only carved likeness of the man who designed the building around it, was in that floor. The floor is gone. The accepted explanation is clear and consistent. Medieval cathedral labyrinths were symbolic pilgrimages. For those unable to travel to Jerusalem, walking the labyrinth fulfilled a spiritual obligation. The path represented the soul's journey. The center represented the holy city. The circuits represented the stages of penitence. This interpretation appears in cathedral guides, in religious art histories, in the official interpretive literature of every cathedral that still possesses a labyrinth. It is internally consistent. It is coherent. It connects the structure to the theological culture that produced it. The path to Jerusalem from Chartres is approximately 3,600 kilometers. The labyrinth path at Chartres is 261.5 meters. The substitution ratio is 1 to 13,767. No medieval theological document suggests that walking 261.5 meters of constrained stone path was understood to produce the same spiritual merit as a 7-month overland journey through war zones and mountain passes. The symbolic equivalence argument was never stated plainly by anyone who walked the labyrinth in the 13th century. It was stated, plainly and repeatedly, by scholars in the 19th century, explaining something they were looking at in ruins. The pilgrimage substitution explanation was constructed to fit the surviving structure. The path dimensions tell you what the structure was built to do. But here is where it stops being about symbolism. The 34-centimeter path width is a clinical parameter. At 34 centimeters, the body cannot walk without active proprioceptive monitoring. The brain must continuously track foot placement, weight distribution, and forward momentum. This is not discomfort. It is directed attention to the body's physical state. Modern occupational therapists use precisely this mechanism, constrained path walking, to bring anxious or dissociated patients back into sensory engagement with their bodies. The path is the width of a therapy protocol. The 112 direction changes across 261.5 meters, approximately 1 every 2.3 meters, produced by lateral alternating movement. At each turn, The walker crosses the body's midline, shifting dominant weight-bearing from right foot to left and back in a sustained, rhythmic pattern. This bilateral alternating stimulation is the active mechanism in eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, EMDR, the trauma treatment protocol approved by the World Health Organization and used in clinical settings worldwide. EMDR was developed in 1987 and formally described in 1989. The Chartres labyrinth was laid in 1205. The mechanism is the same. A 2018 study published in Cogent Psychology measured autonomic nervous system responses in participants before and after walking a labyrinth. The results: reduced heart rate, reduced skin conductance, and measurable activation of the parasympathetic nervous system. The rest and digest state associated with recovery, tissue repair, and reduced inflammation. The same response produced by sleep, by deep breathing protocols, by meditation, and by the clinical walking programs used in cardiac and respiratory rehabilitation. The labyrinth walk produced a measurable dose of that response in participants who walked it once. The research group noted the findings' implications for therapeutic design. They did not note that this design was tested at Chartres in 1205. Now look at this carefully, because the next measurement is the one most guides don't include. The Chartres labyrinth has a diameter of 12.89 meters. The west rose window of Chartres Cathedral has a diameter of 12.87 meters. The same dimension, to within 2 centimeters, applied to both structures. The rose window sits directly above the main entrance on the west wall. The labyrinth sits directly below it on the nave floor. The distance from the base of the west wall to the nearest edge of the labyrinth is approximately 2 meters, a positioning that places the labyrinth in the acoustic field directly inside the entrance. These are not coincidences of proportion. They are features of a building whose geometric relationships were calculated in advance, recorded in the master mason's working documents, and built to specific tolerances. The question of why the labyrinth's diameter was matched to the rose window's diameter is not answered by the pilgrimage substitution theory. Here is the part which will change how you look at every cathedral floor. The 22 documented French Gothic cathedral labyrinths were not identical. The Rheims labyrinth was octagonal, 10.36 meters across, with passages wide enough for 2 walkers side by side. The Chartres labyrinth was circular, 12.89 meters, single path, designed for sequential solo movement. The Amiens labyrinth, destroyed in 1825, was octagonal with a different turning geometry than Rheims. The Auxerre labyrinth, removed in 1690, was circular. The labyrinth at Sens, removed in 1768, was a different scale again. Each cathedral had a different plan. Each labyrinth had a different form. But each produced the same physical experience: constrained, direction-changing, attentionally demanding walking inside an enclosed stone space. The variation in geometry proves these were not copies of a single template. They were independent solutions arrived at by different master masons at different sites across roughly a century of construction. Or independent solutions to the same design problem produced the same functional result only if the masons understood what they were solving for. The master masons who built them were not interchangeable. Jean d'Orbay at Reims, working in the 1210s, produced a different octagonal geometry than the unknown mason at Chartres, working in the 1200s. Both geometries work. Both produce bilateral alternating movement. The variation in form with consistency in function is the signature of a tradition that understood what it was producing and had multiple technical means of producing it. 3 fields of evidence: the specific path dimensions, the documented neurological response to the motion type these dimensions produce, and the geometric consistency across independent sites with different master masons, describe the same institution. A physical structure built to produce a specific, measurable effect in the body of the person using it. The official account of the same structures describes symbolic meaning. Symbolic meaning does not require a path width of exactly 34 centimeters. It does not require 112 direction changes rather than 40 or 200. It does not require the labyrinth diameter to match the rose window to within 2 centimeters. The symbolic explanation accounts for the existence of the labyrinth. It does not account for its specifications. Here's the part which should genuinely stop you. In 1206, Auxerre Cathedral's labyrinth was destroyed, the first documented removal, though sources place it earlier. In 1690, the Auxerre record becomes clearer. In 1768, the chapter records at Sens document the removal of the labyrinth there. In 1779, Canon Jacquemart at Reims issued the order. The Reims labyrinth was taken up. In 1825, the original labyrinth at Amiens was removed. In 1856, the labyrinth at Saint-Quentin was destroyed. The dates survive in chapter records. The decisions survive. What does not survive is a single document from any of these removals that states what the labyrinth was believed to do, or why that function was no longer desired. If you've made it this far, you now know more than 99% of people. But the removal record is where the evidence gets hardest to set aside. The stated reason at Reims was that children were disturbing liturgical services by playing in the circuit during Mass. The chapter record documents this. Canon Jacquemart's order is dated. The rationale is stated. And then the order is executed. The stone labyrinth, installed around 1215 and maintained for 560 years, was broken up and removed in 1779. Canon Jacquemart, in 1779, was describing children running a labyrinth path during services as a problem requiring permanent destruction of a 550-year-old geometric monument. Historians of Gothic architecture have noted in print that this explanation does not adequately account for the scale of the response. A railing would have controlled children. A rope barrier would have controlled children. Canon Jacquemart ordered the removal of the stone itself. The labyrinth at Reims had depicted Jean d'Orbais and 3 other master masons inside its circuit, the only surviving stone portraits of the men who built the cathedral. Those images were destroyed with the labyrinth. The chapter records document the order. They do not document what justified that specific irreversibility. Here's what should genuinely trouble you about those removal records. The 17 removals occurred during the period of Enlightenment aesthetics and institutional rationalization of the 18th and 19th centuries, a period in which Gothic architecture was widely characterized by educated European opinion as barbaric, superstitious, and pre-rational. The neoclassical taste of the period found Gothic ornament excessive and its symbolism obscure. This cultural context is real, and it explains a great deal of the destruction of Gothic interiors during this period. But in every cathedral where the labyrinth was removed, other medieval floor features survived: tile work, heraldic inlays, sanctuary markings, threshold stones. The labyrinths were specifically targeted. The other features were not. The anti-Gothic aesthetic of the period does not, on its own, account for the selective removal of this particular feature, rather than the features around it. And here is what should trouble you about what the official explanation does to that problem. The symbolic pilgrimage interpretation of cathedral labyrinths, the explanation that has appeared in cathedral guides and art histories for 150 years, first entered formal scholarly literature in the 1860s and 1870s. That is after the destruction of the Reims labyrinth in 1779, after the destruction at Sens in 1768, after the destruction at Auxerre. The official explanation of what cathedral labyrinths were for was formally articulated, for the first time, in the written record, after 15 of the 17 removals had already occurred. The explanation did not motivate the removals. The explanation came after. What the canons who ordered the removals believed they were destroying is not in the record. Stay with me here, because this last piece is the one that doesn't resolve. 5 labyrinths survived: Chartres, Bayeux, Saint-Omer, Guingamp, and a replacement at Amiens installed after the original was removed. Each is in a cathedral that maintained continuous institutional governance through the 18th and 19th centuries without the specific chapter decisions that produced the removals elsewhere. Their survival is not explained by particular theological significance or artistic value. The Reims labyrinth, which was destroyed, was by any measure more architecturally complex and historically significant than the surviving labyrinth at Guingamp. Survival correlated with chapter governance, not with intrinsic value. What the chapters that ordered removals shared beyond the period has not been formally studied. The pattern is visible in the dates. The explanation for the pattern is not in the record. This is not an argument that medieval master masons were operating clinical neurology protocols while telling bishops they were building pilgrimage substitutes. What the evidence shows is narrower than that and harder to dismiss. The geometric specifications of these structures produce documented neurological effects in contemporary walkers. Those specifications were maintained with engineering precision across independent sites over 3 centuries. The documented record of their targeted removal is complete. The document that explains what those who removed them believed they were removing does not exist. The knowledge of what the labyrinth was built to do was not stored in a document. It was stored in a building tradition. The master mason knew the specifications because he learned them from the master mason before him, or because he learned them through the experience of walking similar circuits in other cathedrals during his apprenticeship. The specifications were the knowledge. The knowledge was the specifications. When the labyrinth was destroyed, the stone that held the knowledge was gone. The masons who knew why it was built the way it was built had been dead for centuries by the time Canon Jacquemart gave his order. Jean d'Orbais spent roughly 2 decades designing and building Reims Cathedral. He built the labyrinth into its floor. He built his own name and image into the labyrinth. He worked in the geometric tradition of the Gothic master masons, a tradition transmitted through lodge structures by demonstration and proportion, not through written theoretical treatise. He did not write down why the passages of the Reims labyrinth were the width they were, or why the turning geometry produced the pattern it did. He built the building. He walked its circuits. He built his name inside a structure that was designed to do something specific to the body of the person walking it. That knowledge was not written. It was in the stone. The Chartres labyrinth is still there. The path is still 34 centimeters wide. The 112 direction changes are still in the stone. You can walk it on certain Fridays between April and October when the chairs are moved aside. Barefoot or in soft soles, the cold limestone against the foot, the path forcing the body to attend to exactly where it is at each moment. The parasympathetic activation still occurs. The perceptual changes still occur in 86% of walkers. The chapter records of the 17 removals are in the archives of their respective cathedrals. The geometric specifications are published. The neurological research is published. The connection between them appears in none of the cathedral's interpretive materials. Jean d'Orbais' name is not in any of them either. It was in the floor.